Hey everyone, Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia. This week on the podcast, I bring you a story from the trenches. I'm interviewing Brenadan Reid, who is a former broadcaster, current software developer, about his metabolic and personal health journey from the fat ginger nerd to, well, just a ginger nerd. That's his words and not mine. So Brenadan is someone who is super passionate about metabolic health and sharing his story to show that even if fat loss seems impossible, it is absolutely achievable with the right tools and knowledge that really resonates with you. So Brenadan is a former broadcaster turned software developer currently based in Dunedin, New Zealand. After finally losing more than 50 kilos, which is 111 pounds in under 2 years, Brenadan's original weight loss success story was featured on Diet Doctor in 2017. And since 2019, he has spoken of his experience at live events both home and overseas. His book, The Fat Ginger Nerd, where you can read all about his journey, took around 5 years to write and, as Brenadan puts it, about 40 years to live. I have a link as to where you can find Brenadan's book in the show notes, www.thefatgingernerd.com. And before we crack on into this interview, I would like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast, hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of Wikipedia in amongst literally thousands of other podcasts out there. So more people get to learn from the guests that I have on the show and get to tune into the inspirational stories that I share with people such as Brenadan Reid. All right, guys, enjoy the show. Lovely. Brenadan, thank you so much for taking time with me this morning. And you were wearing the hometown Highlanders shirt, which is in fact my hometown rugby shirt. Are you a rugby fan?
I more so in the past than I am now. The shirt is if anything, just a reminder of historical interest. You know, the Highlanders have had their good years. I was at the party at Tony Brown's in '99. And they won the Super Rugby title, was it 2015, 2016, I think it was. Yeah. But I am from the area originally.
Yeah, see, I'm a bandwagoner when it comes to rugby. Like if there's something on that a lot of people I know are interested in watching it, then I'll absolutely jump on and be a huge supporter. Otherwise, I literally forget that rugby is even a thing. Like you just go through periods. But because of course Dunedin is my hometown and I spent many, many years there and still go down frequently, when I'm sort of in the area, in that environment, I'm all for it as well.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm a casual fan these days. I follow it, but not too closely.
Yeah, nice one. Hey, so Brenadan, I really want to chat to you today about your own personal journey. And this is something I think which people really love hearing about because, you know, I talk to a lot of experts in the space, the science behind diet, fitness, stress, lifestyle, how important it is, metabolic health. And I love those conversations. Equally, I love chatting to people who have been in the trenches, who have made significant changes and talk them through the journey, because I think that really resonates. Because sometimes when you are just listening to experts talk, it's really interesting to get the information, but people are unsure as how to apply it to their real life, whereas hearing it from a real person makes it much more relatable.
Yeah, it's the difference between theory and practice, right? The theory can be easy to understand even, but applying it in practice can actually be quite difficult in practical terms. But like you say, I've sort of come up through the school of hard knocks, as it were. I've been there, I've lived it, and it's been quite a story.
Yeah, so you've described yourself as someone who, I mean, you just said the school of hard knocks, you figured things out the hard way. When you look back now, and of course we'll talk through what this looks like for you, but was there a moment you realised that the problem, it actually wasn't you? And I think this is something where a lot of people get stuck thinking that they're the problem, they're the failure. And in fact, it might be the system that's let you down. So do you want to chat us through just thought process?
Yeah, you're absolutely right when you say it's so easy for people to become convinced of themselves that they are the problem, and that was certainly the case in my own experience. When everybody around you is telling you that it's if you're fat, then it's your fault. Why can't you just do all of the same old eat less, move more things that everybody else seems to be able to do without issue? It's got to be on you. I guess the first point in my journey was just in the early stages when I was introduced online to a course being delivered in part by a fellow out of South Africa by the name of Professor Tim Noakes. And this was someone that I began to really latch onto because he was someone with some quite significant academic standing who was prepared to come out and say, well, actually, and this was very much in opposition to what everybody else had been saying at the time. This is about 10 years or so ago now. There is actually a bunch of evidence that suggests that there is perhaps another way for people who are struggling with their weight. And here are some studies, here are some books that you can go and read, and so on. And to have someone at that level who was prepared to come out and say these things, it would just completely at odds with everything I've been taught about health and nutrition to that point. Was really, really eye-opening.
So, Brendan, then chat me through it. When did you begin the path to look for solutions to what you were dealing with, and talk us through what that looked like for you? So, what your book, The Fat Ginger Nerd, but fat is crossed
It's no
out.
longer relevant. It's ancient history.
It is ancient history, absolutely. But what did talk us through your history? What did that look like?
Yeah, well, the name of the book, The Fat Ginger Nerd, it sort of comes down to the three things I used to get the most grief for while I was growing up. Obviously one of those no longer applies, but there's still the other two. The ginger will be next, right? There's a few greys starting to appear around the sides, but give it time. But the fat thing was for me a lifelong issue. Like so many stories we hear about people who develop, I guess you hear about this idea of middle age spread, right? You grow up and then you grow out. Well, I've been growing out right throughout my childhood. And so I had to deal with all of that drama on the playground, the kids in the playground, and even the teachers as well on the school reports. Teachers would write things in my school reports like, Brendan needs to do something about his weight problem, or Brendan does not understand the importance of health and fitness. These are literally school reports that were written, and I've kept all these years. And the advice and the recommendations throughout that time that I was growing up, the 80s and 90s, it was so consistent. And it was coming from everybody on high right up to government level. My first appointment with a dietitian was at about the age of 12. It was when I was introduced to what was being sold as my new best friend in the whole world, which is a poster of a diagram on the wall of something called the healthy food pyramid. And I'm being taught all about the importance of fruits, vegetables, and grains. And as a kid who's not happy and wants to be better, of course I'm going to do my best to follow this advice.
Can I ask you, Brendan, what was your food intake like growing up? Like, and was were weight challenges like part of your background as well? Like, were your parents overweight? Were your siblings overweight? So chat us about that.
My family were all sort of different shapes and sizes. Some big, some small, some tall, some short. But we all sat around the same dinner table at night. We all ate more or less the same things. I was the eldest in the family, and so thus was responsible in helping put the lunches together for all of our siblings before we went off to school. So, we were all eating more or less the same things, but we all had different histories, and we all grew up and out in completely different ways, which sort of hints at something else I'm sure we'll get to discussing later on. How is it that two different people can eat the same sorts of foods and similar sorts of amounts, and their bodies yet react so completely differently?
Okay. So your did you eat do you remember being excessively hungry as a child, or were there and were there treat foods in your house? Was it a bit like, in my house I had 4 siblings, and in fact I was a chubby one. I was a twin. My twin was very, she seemed to be able to eat a lot of junk food and just stay thin, whereas I would eat a lot of food. And eat normal amounts of food but still get fat. So, what was your diet like?
Yeah, the closest thing to treat foods, I guess you might describe them as being, would just be the home baking. There'd be a couple of biscuits or a slice of cake or something in the lunchbox while at school. But other than that, no, breakfast would be cereal or toast. Lunches, as I would prepare them, would be sandwiches and a bit of home baking, that sort of thing. And for dinner time, it would be the meat and 3 veg, potato and a couple of other things. Dessert on occasion. Takeaways only ever once a week. They were a special treat. And that was it. So it didn't seem to me that there was much different from what was going on in my household growing up than what was happening with everybody around me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I often think about this. So, because as I was saying, as a twin, I was the chubby twin. I wasn't at all interested in exercise. Like, I was a bookworm. I was also a nerd. In fact, my parents bought me a secondhand electric typewriter for Christmas. It was the best gift. And I just sat there and I wrote scripts to MacGyver and Jake and the Fat Man, if you remember those programs. And
I remember being called the Fat Man, as in a reference to Jake and the Fat Man. I got all that. There are others as well. Do you think Batman? Dinner, Fat Man? I got that. I got them all. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I remember in intermediate school, we got into this habit of getting off the bus, of walking to the fish and chip shop. I can't believe that we used to do this. And, and I don't think our parents knew, actually. We'd get 20 cents worth of hot chips. But, of course, Jimmy from the fish and chip shop, he was always just a generous man. He would give us a stack load of fish and chips, of chips. And so I developed these sort of habits around food when I'd eat that and then go home and eat dinner. So I can see how I was ending up being chubby, particularly because I didn't actually love exercise, and that was something that happened a couple of years later. What was your relationship like with exercise?
My relationship with exercise was increasingly non-existent, shall we say. I found that in the early years before I really started to take off horizontally, I suppose, for lack of a better expression, I was just okay, sort of middle of the road on the sports days and all that sort of thing. But as I grew, obviously, things became more and more difficult and less enjoyable as a consequence.
Yeah, and did you ever enjoy it as you were growing up, or was it something you sort of had to do?
Only very much in at school in class. I despised it. The PE teachers, particularly in high school, were my enemy. They were the other side of the equation. Like I grew to really think very little of dietitians. The dietitians were the other side of the equation. They were the ones telling me to eat less. The PE teachers at school were the ones telling me to eat more. But whenever I ate less, I just got hungry. Whenever I moved more, I just got tired. And nobody had any answers for these things beyond saying, oh, well, you're just going to have to get used to that, or you just need to try harder. You need to be stronger. You need more willpower. It all comes back to you. If you're fat, it's your fault.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that video games was sort of like a coping mechanism for you, but also as a training for problem solving, which I thought was super interesting. So, what lessons from gaming ended up helping you most in changing your health? Because I really want to sort of get to that sort of tipping point for you where actually, things shifted. And you mentioned Tim Noakes, but how that looked.
Yeah. The video gaming, I guess, is where the nerd side of the personality comes in, and that sort of came about through my coming to realize that I found it hard to make friends a lot of the time. But if the real world is rejecting me, then I will reject it. Let's try and operate my life in ways that are as removed from the real world as much as possible. And if I was older, if I was an adult at that time, I can understand how maybe people might turn to other vices like alcohol or gambling, sex, drugs, rock and roll, or whatever, right? But as a child, none of these things are on my radar. So what options do I have? And there are books and TV shows and music and so on, but these are all things to be consumed passively, more or less. Whereas with video games and computing in general, there's a degree of interactivity. So it felt to me like I'm having conversations with machines instead of people. And the beauty with these machines is they didn't care how fat I was. They didn't care how I looked. They would just respond to my input and feed me the output, and I was happy with those sorts of relationships. And so gaming grew to be a big part of my life, perhaps as a consequence of that. What I did find as I was sort of reflecting on this while writing the book, thinking back to those early days, one other thing I perhaps subconsciously got out of gaming was just the reminder to myself that I wasn't perhaps the complete idiot that so many had made me out to be for my inability to lose the weight, that I was capable of solving problems. And in the gaming world, and in particular with various video games that I've played, I've learned a lot about identifying which changes when you're gearing up a character in whatever game will provide benefits, be it weapons or armor or whatever. This is all conceptual and virtual, obviously. But with gaming in particular, there was also an extra value that I picked up on the merit of compounding benefits, if you like, in that you can make any individual change or upgrade to your gear or your position in the game, and it might be helpful, but those effects can be magnified and compounded upon greatly when you get the right combination of various factors together. It's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle with enough of the right pieces so that you eventually form a picture that kind of represents something that is sort of greater than just the sum of its parts. So just that value of compounding interest and getting all of the right puzzle pieces together in terms of, and sort of transferring that idea to diet. It's more in terms of, what should I be eating? What should I not be eating? What are the reasons for those? Should I be looking at food groups? Should I be looking at nutrients? And just, trying to figure out all of these different elements, all of these different pieces to the puzzle, which in the gaming world was just second nature to me. And I found that sort of mentality transferred surprisingly easily to figuring out the right diet for me.
So at what point, like you mentioned that you came across Tim Noakes about 10 years ago, 2015, what were you searching for when you found him?
So his website at the time, he was involved with a program called the Real Meal Revolution. Yeah. And it was actually recommended to me by somebody who I'm sure we'll talk about more a little bit later on. And I was immediately skeptical because I recognized just from this website that this looked like a low carb thing. And I'm thinking, really, low carb, that Atkins diet, hadn't that been discredited years ago? Because this was something I had heard of years ago, going back to the days of Dr. Atkins when he was still around. But I also remembered that all the other experts out there had continually shouted him down to saying, no, there's no evidence that works. And besides, low carb by extension means high fat. And we all know how bad fat is for you. Whatever you do to lose weight, do not do low carb. And so to be looking at this website and identities such as Prof Noakes and so on, it was really confronting to have to take that on and actually consider it seriously for the first time.
Who was it that introduced you to Tim Noakes?
So I actually went to a local gym in town.
Oh, great.
Which is an interesting sort of story in itself. I sort of had come to the point where I decided, well, diet was never doing anything for me. All the usual advice, it just had never worked. Maybe I can exercise my way out of trouble. So I started walking to work and back for a few months. Lost a little bit of weight, nothing that anybody would really notice. But I thought, okay,
but you did.
Yeah, it was just a subtle adjustment on the scales, right? And I thought, well, let's maybe explore this further. Let's get some professional help. And so I made this appointment at the gym. And this was my big dirty secret that I didn't want to tell anybody because I figured, what had happened in the past, if I tried things, people would be like, oh, here we go. He's trying something again. Bless his heart. Everybody assumed that it would come to nothing as it always had. And so this was my big dirty secret.
Are you sure, or is this your, because it's interesting you say that, but this is your perception of how other people viewed you and your weight? Or is this like actual people in your life telling you this?
Both. Yeah, I'm doing all of the things that people were telling me to do to eat less and move more and low fat this and low calorie that. Teachers are making me walk and run extra laps around the block and taking me out of classes and doing all of these things. And they're telling me it's all for my own good and it's not working. I need to try harder. I need to do more. As I'm getting older, and I'm sort of at a point where I'm able to stand up for myself, it's sort of transferred into this from finger pointing and finger wagging to this sort of, good luck to him. But I could just tell from the way in which these things were being said that nobody was really taking seriously, and I wasn't either.
And how old were you at that point?
At which point, that covers quite a substantial part of my life.
Yeah, like when you started walking to the gym, walking to work, and then like...
Right. Yeah, so walking to work, that was the autumn of 2015, and that was a deliberate choice in the timing because, again, down here in Dunedin during the winter, the days are short, the nights are long. Nobody's going to see the fat guy struggling his way to work and back every day in the darkness.
And how old were you?
So 10 years ago, I was 36, 37.
Yeah. And I just find this so interesting, Brenda, because I talk to a lot of people about exactly what you've just described. Like the narratives that are built as we are young just permeate and persist, like for decades, actually. And in fact, one of the hardest things for people to get their head around is how do we change the narrative in our mind. And I think what you've done with regard, and of course we're going to talk about that transformation, but there must also have been a shift in how you felt about what you were able to do and achieve, and also those voices that were telling you couldn't would have been dialed down because you've actually got the evidence in front of you. Like I find it really interesting to listen to people relay their experiences, because in your mind these people are still saying these things now, even though you're an adult. You're more than an adult, 36, 37, so but
Sure.
isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, there was an element of that, to be sure, but I also recognise that, okay, as an adult, I would have the right to say no to anything that anybody at a gym would tell me how to do. Like back at high school with the PE teachers, I couldn't really say no. I'm not able to stand up for myself in that sort of environment and that sort of position. But as an adult, and when I'm dealing with a professional, the power balance is a little bit different. And I figured, well, I'm in the position now, in theory, where I can say no to anything that I'm told to do that I just feel is not worth doing. So yeah, a bit of both there. So I made this appointment at this gym thinking, this will be the easiest sell job ever, right? The guy will take one look at me and sign me up. And instead, the exact opposite happened. He actually refused to sign me up. He said to me, I don't know that exercise is your main issue. I mean, we could sign you up. You might lose a little bit of weight, etc. But I think we really need to be looking at is your diet. And straight away in my mind, the defenses are going up. I'm thinking, oh, this is not going to end well, right? And he then pointed me to this website, Real Meal, suggesting I try this low carb thing. And I'm having this discussion, really, can this be for real? And he made the really good argument. He said, mate, look, you're far from the first person like yourself that I've seen come through my doors. As a business owner, I wouldn't be in the position I was in if I didn't have some idea of how to help these people. I've seen this work in other people like yourself in the past based on my own professional experience. And so, in my opinion, based on my experience, I think this is something you should consider as well. And I couldn't really refute that argument. I thought, well, he makes sense from his position. I can see where he's coming from. But at the same time, so much of what he's suggesting to me is completely at odds with what everybody else had been saying my whole life up to that point. So it was this mental struggle. I spent days going back and forth, agonizing over the rest of my week. What do I do with this? What do I do with this? How do I proceed?
And also, like, you're just like, that just goes to show it's difficult to more a trust issue, isn't it? Because yes, this is so at odds with everything, every piece of advice you've ever received that never worked.
That's right.
Every piece, it never worked. Who is this man? Who is this? What gym is this?
The gym is Body Synergy Gym. It's a small gym in central Dunedin.
Oh yeah, and remind me what's his name? I know him. We've had comms. He's
Rowan
great.
Ellis.
Yeah, love him. He's great. He's so good. Yeah,
he is.
Yeah, amazing.
Fantastic. So he suggested I give this diet a go, and I was not at all convinced. I had taken a few days to sort of sit down and have a sulk at home about it, and I eventually came to the conclusion that the only thing I know for sure at this point is that somebody somewhere is wrong. It's either this guy at the gym or it's everybody else. And on the balance of probabilities, surely the gym folk are wrong. But the only way I would know with absolute certainty just how wrong this idea was would be if I would actually try it.
Well, that is so interesting to me, Brendan, because you basically, nothing else worked, yet you still thought he would be wrong. Isn't that interesting, the way that the brain operates? Like I'm like, why wouldn't the thought process be, well, shit, nothing else has worked. So I've got absolutely nothing to lose, which was not how you viewed it.
No, that was what he pointed out to me, but I at the time, but I couldn't take it on board. My faith in the official advice from on high, from above, from our health authorities that have been so steadfast and consistent for so long, the idea that could actually be wrong in any way was just completely inconceivable to me. And so it took several days to come around to the idea. And like I say, when I began with it not with the best of intentions, but with the worst of intentions. I thought, right, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I'm going to expose low carb for the fad that I've been taught that it was for so many years already. If I'm going down, I'm going to take somebody with me. And so I made this commitment to experiment with this diet, expecting that if anything, like I've been warned about for so many years, that it could literally be the end of me, when in fact it turned out instead to be a whole new beginning.
So what were the first tangible changes that you made to your diet that gave you that penny drop moment when you realized that he was onto something?
So the very first thing that I noticed was just the number on the scales. I mean, I had so much weight to lose. At my heaviest, I was 137. I'd walked my way down to 132. So I began with the diet change. October 2015, I was 132 kilos. And I wanted to be sure that I would give this diet a fair chance at proving that it was wrong. So I actually bizarrely decided I would not weigh myself for as long as I could, so that I wouldn't fall into the trap of just trying the scales after a couple of days, no change. See, here's proof that it doesn't work. Let's give it some time. And I eventually lasted about 3 weeks before curiosity got the better of me, and I finally stepped on the scales, and I'd lost about 3 kilos. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't really feel any different. I didn't really look any different. This is an interesting change on the scales, though. But even then, at the same time, I'm thinking, this could be anything. This could still be just a coincidence. This still doesn't prove anything. But all the same, let's just give it more time and see how it goes. So the number on the scales was probably the first thing. It took maybe another 6 to 8 weeks before I started to feel any different. And that was mostly with the fitting of my clothes. Historically, clothes had always been too small for me. My wardrobe was full of things for years that were always too small for me. And now for the first time, my clothes are starting to feel less tight and more comfortable, and then too comfortable, and then too loose. And about 3 months in, I find myself shopping for clothes, for smaller clothes, for the first time in my entire life. And that was mind blowing. And that was the point where I really sort of began to realize that, okay, something really interesting is happening here. I don't really fully understand it yet. I don't really know where I'm possibly going to end up. I had no frame of reference. How much could I lose? I had no idea of what I was capable of becoming. But let's just keep riding this wave, and let's just see where it ends up.
Can you talk us through the diet changes? So what did your diet, if you remember, what did your diet look like the day before you started the diet? And then think to that 3-month mark when you were shopping for new clothes, like what were you eating then?
Yeah, so the diet change was fairly gradual. It took place over a period of about 6 or 8 weeks or so, I suppose. There are some out there who make a change like this, and they just, so it's a hard cutoff point, right? They go cold turkey, they have a big kitchen clear out, and then they start fresh. And I didn't do that. I realized after listening to Prof Noakes and others that oh my gosh, I'm surrounded with a house full of junk that I had presumed was actually healthy for me. But at the same time, I was mindful of my budget and so on. I didn't want anything to go to waste necessarily. So what I did was I started just by eating what I still had in the house, but I knew enough at that point to know not to buy anything more of it. So I would start to run things down naturally, and that in turn would then give me the time over the following weeks to sort of explore for myself, okay, what does low carb actually mean? It says in the name, don't eat carbs. Well, what does that mean sort of by extension in terms of what should I be eating in its place? And I needed that time to really figure these things out. And so I'm taking the time to go supermarket shopping. I'm wandering down aisles I've never been down before. I'm looking at food labels on everything. And over time, as the older foods are being phased out. The last of the bread, the last of the pizza and the pies and the noodles and the pasta. It was always starchy carbs. I never had so much of a sweet tooth, thankfully, while growing up. Mine was more of a savoury tooth, but if anything, perhaps that played into my favour. I found myself no longer having to feel guilty about eating meat. I thought, well, I love meat. I can just load up on the meat, and I'm bringing home some vegetables that I hadn't really necessarily had much of in the past. And a lot of these things, these meat and vegetables, are things that, unlike the pizzas and the pies and so on, these are things you can't just grab out of the freezer, chuck in the microwave, zap it up, wolf it down, and forget about it, get on with your day. These required some preparation, right? So I'm having to learn how to cook as an adult for the first time. And so these processes took a bit of time, but it was a gradual period of about 6 to 8 weeks where I just ran down whatever I had in the house, the last of the bad stuff, and just gradually replaced it with more of what mostly turned out to be meat and veg, bit of dairy in there as well, of course.
Yeah, so chat me through a day of food then at that point, if you recall it.
So, I mean, I can certainly tell you more about what I'm eating now, but in terms of putting that routine together, it was very gradual. So, my routine.
Yeah, so like breakfast, did you have 2 meals a day? Did you have 3 meals a day?
So there are 3 rules. Let's go back to the 3 rules I had set for myself when going on this low carb plan. The first of these rules that I came up with was that I would eat whenever I'm hungry, and I won't when I'm not. And I was so convinced going into this that this rule alone would guarantee the failure of this diet. This would show it up for the fraud it is, because I've been taught for so long to believe that eating less and depriving yourself, restricting yourself, and starving yourself was essential to weight loss. And so I thought, screw it, I want to be able to eat as much of the sort of thing as I like, and it still has to work. So I was so sure that this rule alone would guarantee the failure, right? I was deliberately trying to fail this diet. The second of my rules was that, okay, obviously with low carb, I needed to understand that means restricting the carbs. That means understanding how to read food labels, and we sort of touched on that already. And the third was to track my progress. I needed to be able to measure what was happening over time, so that I could say, here's the data that proves that it doesn't work as was my hypothesis. I really saw it as a kind of a grand experiment, if you like, an N of 1 case study. I wasn't familiar with those terms at that time, but that was effectively how I treated it. Let's treat this whole idea or exercise as an experiment. And so as I'm figuring out, the sorts of things I need to be eating and the sorts of things I need to be avoiding, I'm making these discoveries just on a very natural, organic basis over a period of weeks. I would bring home things like burger patties, so that I could make my own bunless burgers at home. Just put in some cheese and whatever, wrap it in a lettuce leaf instead of a bun, and that's really simple. That was one of the earlier ones at home. There was also chops, lamb chops, again, a tray of them. You can just put them in the oven and salt them and cook them, and super easy. Chicken, I was into the chicken breast, and I would have some stir-fry veg with that. I later transitioned from chicken breast to chicken thighs, just because there's a little bit of extra fat with the thighs. That one took a bit more effort. Like I needed to get a fry pan. I needed a few kitchen utensils because I just never really cooked to that level of seriousness before. I figured out that fish, coloured fish, salmon, tuna. So tuna would become one of my favourite fillings for omelettes. If I was having omelettes, tuna and cheese is my favourite sort of combo for a 2-egg omelette, for example. Salmon, I would just pan fry, and I learned to add some spinach with that on the side, and some aioli just to fill the plate up there. So these are all sort of discoveries I had made for myself. Mince was another easy, practical, simple, and relatively cheap thing to do. So these are all sort of discoveries I was making for myself in my own time, just very naturally, and just letting the process play out. And since then, my habits have now sort of kind of firmed up. I still eat most of those things even now. My dinners are quite regimented. I have a specific dinner for each night of the week, which sounds really strict and rigid, but in my mind, the upside of that is it takes away the thinking of what am I going to have for dinner tonight, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? A lot of families actually eat like that, Brendan. Like, you know, we have a rotation of about, 4 to 5 dinners that we have in the week. We might have a couple of, not surprise meals, but, I have to create a lot of recipes for my recipe portals, or it might be something like that. But or sort of on the fly, but they're on the fly as in on Saturday, we might go, what should we have for dinner? And then we might go, should we just have X, which might be one of our usual dinners, or it might be something a little bit different. But to your point, it just takes the thinking out of it when you can base a routine around some simple structure, which offers you guardrails. So it takes away a lot of choice, but there is real freedom in that, because then you have much more confidence in those choices that you're making.
Yeah.
Brendan, did you feel that when you were eating and making this change, did you notice a shift in your appetite or hunger?
I did, but it took a long time for that to happen. As per my rule one, I want to be able to eat as much as I want and still lose weight, which in my head was this great impossibility, right? But the number on the scales was starting to work its way down from the very beginning. The clothes was the second thing, as I've mentioned before, and the appetite was probably the third. So about 4 months or so when I was in, and I remember a particular example, and I wrote about this in the book. At the time, at the place where I worked, there was a buffet cafeteria nearby that I would go to for lunch every day. And so as part of my adjustment and my transition to the sort of lower carb style, I knew to stay away from things like the rice and the pasta and the bread, and would just focus on the meat and veg. But even then, after the nature of the food had changed, the volume of it really hadn't. And I was just so used to, since it was a buffet, just loading up 2 big plates of whatever for lunch every day. And I remember one day, it was a sunny day in February, and I'd finished my plate number 1, and just out of habit, right, I get up to go and fill up for plate number 2, and I just sort of stopped, and I thought, I don't think I feel like I need another one anymore. I just sort of sat back down, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I'm not requiring as much to feel full. And I was also noticing another incident that happened either just before or just after this. I would take a banana with me in my bag when walking to work for like a morning tea or something. And one day, after a few weeks or something, I'm going through my bag just to tidy up and clear it out, and there's this rotten banana at the bottom of the bag. And I thought, what's happening here? And it's because I'd stopped snacking without even realizing that I'd stopped snacking. And the lunch situation was the first time that I'd actually noticed it. And then I think I found the banana afterwards. And that was when I realized, wow, okay, I'm actually eating less, but I'm eating less not up front by consciously choosing to go without. The way I'm able to eat less in what seems like a sustainable way, like I'm not feeling so hungry so often anymore, is because I've first changed what it was that I was eating. That then in turn seemed to, the way I interpreted this change in appetite was that, okay, well, my body must be just happier, more satisfied with what it is that I'm now feeding it, so that it's not constantly sending me these signals that I need whatever it is that I'm needing. It's not smart enough to literally knock you over the head and say, hey, feed me more of this particular food, but you can sort of infer what it needs by how you're feeling over time. And I found that, when I'm eating more of this real food, this low carb meat and veg, that my body just seemed more at peace with itself, and it wasn't fighting my desire to want to lose weight and be healthy. This seemed to be happening just quite naturally of its own accord, without any real effort on my part at all. It was amazing.
And alongside this, you were doing a lot of other education at the time, sort of looking at what you thought you believed about nutrition, getting more resources that essentially flipped that on its head. Do you want to chat us through that sort of educational piece for you? Because I know that this formed a big part of, what you talk about in the book, but also just, how you frame nutrition
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I realized from the start that I had a lot to learn. If Prof Noakes and others around him were right, if the guy at the gym really was right, then obviously that would raise the question of, well, how is this not more of a thing? How is low carb not more widely known / understood / accepted than it already is? And so, that was a question that came to mind fairly early on as I'm coming to terms with all of this and realizing that, okay, this actually seems to be doing the trick for me. But I kind of put it aside at first just to focus on myself and just seeing my own journey through. My own oxygen mask before helping others and exploring the wider issues. So in the beginning, I'm really just exploring for my own personal benefit, and so I'm watching videos online on YouTube and elsewhere. I'm picking up on a few recurring book recommendations. I'd been recommended the books by the likes of Gary Taubes and Nina Teicholz, who themselves were outsiders in the sense that they weren't experts necessarily on diet and nutrition, but their background was in journalism. Just finding the facts and stating them for the rest of us to take on board and to consider. And so I found a lot of their work really relatable. I'm at a point now where, these years later, I have a whole shelf of a row of books on my bookshelf. There's 3 shelves, and one of them is full of these books on health. I'm proud to say I've probably met in person as many as maybe 2/3 of the authors on that bookshelf.
Oh, wonderful!
Which is so cool to be able to meet these people and just thank them in person for their contribution to my journey. I've read all of those books that are on my shelf. There's nothing on my TBR on that front at the moment. But yeah, there was a lot to learn in the way of book reading and video watching, certainly for those early years.
Yeah, and out of all of the things which you learned across that through the education, was there anything that particularly struck you as most surprising, or most like you just could not believe that there were elements of that it had been so wrong?
Yeah, I guess just the strength of the dichotomy that I was uncovering in my journey. I'm finding more books, I'm finding more studies, and all of this just sort of adds to this body of evidence that I'm putting together here. All of which, again, the official advice from health authorities, they continue to deny that any of this stuff exists. And so my thinking, as my own sort of health situation begins to come under control, and I'm starting to think further ahead, I start to want to try and understand more about, how is it that, you have all of these people saying one thing, and you have all of these studies and publications on the other, that the two aren't meeting, that these things aren't coming together, that the evidence is not necessarily translating into policy in the ways that I might have expected.
Yeah, for sure. That's something which a lot of us sort of have questions over. And how do you now look at, there are obviously you know research, you can read research, are you still looking at new stuff coming out, or have you sort of reached this place where you're not looking to continue to learn?
Yeah, I would say I'm not researching perhaps as actively as I was when writing the book, for example. That would be the most challenging part of finishing that book. The book structure is essentially 3/4 personal story, if you like. But in my mind, that's kind of just setting the stage. It's like, okay, well, now that you know my story, I've built myself the stage. Here's what I want to say. What's the moral of that story? What are the lessons that can be learned? And that sort of led me to look at doing some research, and this is something that, with my sort of more engineering background as opposed to sciences, was quite a challenge. But in ways I was able to borrow from my professional background and my gaming background and apply them in interesting ways, and was able to learn a lot as a consequence. It was a lot of work and a lot of effort to finish it. Those last 3 chapters were by far and away the most difficult to put together. The personal story, in contrast, just sort of fell out of me, right? It was such an amazing experience that I just wanted to share it with anybody who would listen. And I finally decided that, okay, this needs to be channeled. I began keeping a journal just a few months into the weight loss journey, and I'm so glad that I did that, looking back, because there are so many details in there that I would just never remember now had I tried to keep it all in my head all these years. And obviously the journal in turn helped to form the basis for the book. But the research is something that I would say at this point in time, I'm still keeping my eyes open. I subscribe to a lot of different mailing lists. I get all sorts of interesting emails from various people coming through. The odd video on YouTube. I attend the odd conference. I was at low-carb Brisbane, and you were there too. We caught up there, and and I had a spot on stage there that weekend as well. So yeah, there's a bit of that going on around the place, but perhaps not quite to the extent what it was when I was writing the book. I'm content to just keep in touch with the space and just follow it more as an observer at this point for now.
Yeah, and with regards to the journal, you're right, that's so valuable to keep this detailed record of some of everything that's going on, so you can not only sort of look back on the challenges, but also you can celebrate the small wins as they come. Because oftentimes when you're in the moment, if I just think, or even now in real life, you forget how far you've come, or you can forget how far you've come. If you're reading some of those early entries now, has there been a real shift in your mindset around not necessarily the knowledge and information, because obviously I mean, it's pretty clear that this is the approach that worked for you, but maybe anything about how you feel about yourself or what you're able to achieve?
To an extent, I would say that if I had started the journal at the same time as I'd started the diet, the differences would probably be greater. But because I'd started out with a view to proving it wrong, I'd set up fully expecting to fail. I thought, well, there's really no point in going to any more trouble than that. But after about 5 months, the number on the scales is dropping. I'm shopping for smaller clothes. I'm starting to feel more satisfied physically with the food that I'm eating. That by about March, about 5 months in, that was the point at which I realized, okay, my brain is pretty full now, and this looks like it's going to be the beginning of something that's pretty special, and I would just regret it if I didn't start to keep a note of these things as they started to play out. So I began journaling about March of 2016. I started out with a bit of a backstory, just a complete brain dump of everything I could remember from those past 5 months. So that part of it was retrospective, but from then on, it was just an ongoing thing, not necessarily a regular thing like a diary. It was never a daily diary, any sort of obligation to write things on a regular basis. It was just to write whatever I felt about what I was doing as it came to mind. And it might be every few days, or it might be once a week, or it might just be a couple of sentences one day, or it might be a couple of pages the next. No real pattern to it, but it was just a way that enabled me to have these conversations in ways that didn't necessarily bother too many people around me. There are times with certain friends and family, it's like, okay, Brendan, we get it. Things are going great. Can you just let it go? And I couldn't. This was just, for me, the fulfillment of a lifelong impossible dream that the last thing I expected would ever really come true, and now it was. And so the journal became my outlet, my safe space for really helping me process a lot of these thoughts and feelings. The main difference between the earlier days and the journaling now that I do, I'm still journaling now after nearly 10 years. The earliest entries show someone who's still not fully convinced of what he's doing. I'm just still a bit confused and uncertain, and just the legacy of the past, and just trying to reconcile that with the potential for this whole new approach, even though it was something that everybody had tried to steer me away from for so long. So still coming to terms with that, still looking for sources of information around trying to understand. I'm still making first-time discoveries at the supermarket, those sorts of things. That was what the early journal entries, if you like, looked like.
Yeah. And then, Brendan, across the course of the last 10 years, any periods of time where you faltered?
Yes and no, for various reasons. There have been a couple of occasions where people would say to me, okay, great, you're all sorted now. When are you going to start eating normal again? So my response to that at one point was, well, the only way I'm going to find out is if I try eating the so-called normal diet, and straight away the weight just starts to come straight back on. And so my response to that was, okay, well, what's normal for you is clearly not normal for me. I need to be eating what works for me, regardless of what guidelines or anything say.
And I've got to say, sorry, at what world do we live in where meat and vegetables isn't normal? That's just weird.
Right. It's interesting how like low carb is seen as something that's crazy, radical, dangerous, or extreme. But if you were to characterize it as a meat and veg diet, would it seem so crazy, radical, dangerous, or extreme when you put it that way? Perhaps not.
Yeah. And any other? Sorry, you were going to mention another time, or?
Yeah. So when are you going to start eating normal again? So there was that experiment. There was the COVID situation. So being in lockdown meant that I couldn't go to my usual lunch buffet for lunch at work because I'm now sort of having to work from home. So I'm kind of having to prep more from home. And by extension, I'm also no longer walking to work. So the exercise suffered during that period. Post-COVID, there was a period sort of about 22, 23, around the time that the book had just come out. I was dealing with kind of a stressful period in my life. And I found that the weight was starting to creep back up at that point, and that finally led me to change my job and actually take up a gym habit finally for the first time. My first visit to the gym was back in 2015, and it was just a one-off. I never made that subscription until almost 8 years later. I finally went back there in 2023, about 2.5 years now ago. Signed up, and I've been going there 4 days a week ever since, and still holding on to that habit, surprisingly. Which is amazing. It's one of the key things that have actually changed perhaps since I've written the book, because I wrote in the book how anti-exercise and how anti-gym I was, even though that was what had sort of set me on the journey was that particular visit there that day. But I've come around to that now. My new work, for example, has me working from home, so the gym gets me out of the house and talking face to face with people as well. So there's the social benefit, as well as the physical benefits there. So I've done the complete 180 on the gym environment now. I'm pleased to say I wouldn't say I'm fully comfortable, but I'm less uncomfortable, if you like.
Yeah, that's amazing. Exercise, if you could put all of the benefits of exercise into a pill, you'd be a millionaire if you sold that pill, for sure. And Brenadan, what tips would you give people who might be in your situation, maybe either at the start of their journey or if they're wobbling a little bit? Like, were there anything that really helped you just get back onto the straight and narrow? Any mindset shifts? Any did you have to revisit rules? Did you just have to make it like a recommitment to yourself? Like, what does that look like?
I guess in the simplest possible terms, I would just say keep it real. And I mean that both in the figurative and the literal sense. There's so much of the processed stuff that comes in the packets and the boxes and so on. And there's still a little bit of that in my diet. I'll have the odd protein bar, for example. The numbers still have to measure up. It still has to be low in carbs and whatever. I won't shy away from processed food completely. I'm just shying away more from carbs. So it's not so much a paleo approach. It's more of a keto or animal-based keto, I suppose you might describe it. But just to keep it real, keep it simple. Too many variables, too many rules that can get in the way of things. I like the idea of the routine, the 7-day dinner plan that I just sort of invented for myself without really necessarily meaning to do it that way. Was just how it played out for me. Takes the thinking out of the equation. Just keeping it simple, keeping it real. And if anybody asks questions, are you sure that this is the way you want to be doing it? Don't you want to be following the standard advice or whatever? We all have to make that choice, as I did, between compliance and success. And as much as they ought to, and we would all love for them to mean the same thing, right? To follow the standard advice and see the success, that'd be great. In my case, that didn't happen. And so, there comes a choice, a point at which we have to make that choice of, do we want to keep doing what we're supposed to be doing, even if it's not necessarily working, versus trying something different on the chance that you actually find the results that you're looking for. So for me, success over compliance. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily pro low carb inherently as I am pro success. I was once asked the question, right, of what would it take for you to stop eating low carb? What would it take for you to change to something away from low carb? And I thought about that for a moment, and my answer to that question was, as soon as something better comes along, as soon as something more effective for my health and my weight comes along. I'm not so much wedded to low carb, I'm wedded to what works, I'm wedded to success, and that just happens to be what works for me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's critical, right? Because everyone is really different as to what is going to work for them, and you absolutely found what works for you, which actually for the most part most people could probably do really well on an approach the way that you've described, and particularly with the exercise element sort of added in as well. Brenadan, I do think, though, that probably over the course of the last 10 years, the acceptance of different ways of doing things, like it has really changed. Like low carb is now much more mainstream than it was sort of 10 years ago. So I imagine that comments around eating normally and stuff probably you're not getting that quite to the same extent that you were once.
Not so much anymore. If I do get to hear those sorts of comments these days, they tend to come from people in academia. I went to see a student dietitian as part of their training here in town just a few years ago, and the nature of the appointment was not at all about what works for me in finding my success. It was about how can we get Brenadan to comply better with the dietary guidelines, taking no notice at all of what I had achieved by not following those guidelines and doing something completely different. So there's still an element of that out there, but I think you're right. Over this 10-year period, it's become a little less niche. I wouldn't say it's gone full on mainstream, but there are more places around town that I can go to and I can say, oh, do you do these burgers without the carbs, or can you do these curries without the rice, or is there a low carb option on your menu? Sometimes these people will say, oh, are you sure you would like a full combo, the drinks and the fries and whatever? And my response to that seems to work, that I've figured out for myself, is that I tell people that I have an intolerance. So it's not I don't go into specifics as to what the intolerance is unless they ask, and I just say I'm carbohydrate intolerant. It's not something that will kill me, but I will either feel a bit crook afterwards and or weigh more the next day, and I just don't want to be dealing with any of that. I need to just keep it simple, keep it real, avoid the carbs, and just stay the course.
Yeah, amazing, Brenadan. And we've obviously you've got a book. How else, and what sort of do you see talking about low carb sort of, obviously we're doing this interview, but like other elements of your journey sort of informing where you head next in terms of your career, or in terms of the things that you do? Like I know that you and I have talked offline about study. Like how does that look?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The short answer to that will be I'm honestly not sure, but I actually really like that answer because there's some excitement in not knowing. Because for so long in my life, I had figured that I wouldn't live a very happy life. I wouldn't live a very long life. I seem to have done my best to avoid those sorts of outcomes so far. And so the fact that I have these possibilities and this potential beyond the book and so on is actually really exciting for me. I have, as you say, explored study options. I've studied health coaching. I've since gotten my bachelor's degree in IT. It's not related, but there's been more study there. I have looked at postgrad study, and I've since figured out for myself that maybe that's not necessarily going to be the best approach for me. But that doesn't mean that I don't also have ideas. Like I have a goal one day to maybe do a research project of sorts. I have a particular idea for a piece of research I'd love to do, and maybe that'll form the basis for another publication someday. I really don't know. But just I think more on the advocacy front. I love telling the story. I'm happy to do the talks at the conference and that sort of thing. I used to work in radio for years, so give me a mic and I'm good to go. That's no problem ever. But yeah, the advocacy is probably where I see myself heading. Exactly what that looks like, I'm not sure. I'm quite excited about this organisation over in Brisbane that was discussed there, the Australasian Metabolic Health Society, coming together, a lot of big wigs across Australia and New Zealand coming together to share this message about metabolic health, which is much broader, obviously, than just one's body weight. It covers all sorts of metabolic conditions, your type 2 diabetes, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your fatty liver, and so on. And, these are all conditions that, for so long we've understood to be completely separate and not at all related to each other. And now, things are starting to come together, and the realization that if these are all symptoms, completely separate sets of symptoms of a common underlying cause, then there's real potential to really target and address that cause and see so many downstream benefits in so many people in so many ways. And just getting that message out there, I'd be keen to be a part of that, whether it's through the AMHS or through other means. remains to be seen. But certainly happy to share that message with anyone who will listen.
I love it, Brenadan. I love it. You do have a radio voice, actually. What radio were you on?
A couple of small community stations where I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Brenadan, can you let listeners know where they can find more about you and your book?
Yeah, my website is just thefatgingernerd.com. There's links to social media there, Facebook, YouTube, and X. There's a few blog posts there, so if people are sort of unsure about the book, you can sort of have a read of some of my articles there to sort of try before you buy, as it were, and links to purchasing the book are all on the website as well.
Yeah, amazing. Brenadan, thank you so much for your time today. I think it's been such a valuable conversation because many of those experiences you share, I feel are sort of can be widespread. So when people hear about it and hear how it's been overcome, I just think that's truly really valuable. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed that conversation. You can see Brenadan's super passionate about his journey and just really wanting to share that with the wider population who may be in a similar position. And it's always so helpful hearing from someone that you can relate to, as it shows you what is possible. As I said, I've popped a link as to where you can find Brenadan's book in the show notes. Next week on the podcast, I speak to Kyle van der Leest. He is a naturopath and founder of Level Up Health. Super interesting conversation about peptides. That is next week. For now, though, you can catch me over on Instagram, Threads, and X at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website, mikiwilliden.com. If you're catching this on Wednesday when this is published, you get access to my meal plans for 50% off as your Christmas gift from me. All right, guys, have the best week. See you later.